Hey everybody, this is Mike with 4 and 6 Music. What I'd like to do is I'd like to go over a couple of common mistakes I usually see with a lot of my beginner students in particular, though honestly even with some intermediate students I'd say I'd see some of these issues pop up from time to time, right? So let's go over them one at a time. The first thing I'd like to go over is when students play too fast. So a lot of times when it comes to playing, a lot of students will tend to want to rush what they're able to play and try to match what they're listening to on their favorite songs, on their favorite records. And I'm going to use a couple of examples throughout to illustrate some of this. So for this example, I'm going to use the main riff to Good Times, Bad Times by Led Zeppelin. So for this riff, we have which can be a little bit tricky for beginners. So let's say that is a difficult riff to play and you're not able to play it cleanly. My suggestion would be to slow it down first. And actually the slower the better, because then you're going to be able to fix a lot of the difficulties that you have playing that riff, or anything else for that matter that you're trying to play. Sometimes it has to do with just getting your fingers to move quickly. Other times it has to do with getting the notes to sound nice and clear as well, especially for this, that. It's very easy on that particular riff to make this sound sloppy, right? So you want to make sure that you get aspects of whatever it is you're playing, such as maybe the string, well, not really string skipping, but just going from one string to the next, playing that arpeggio, that power chord arpeggio, followed by that over there, that like major sounding riff before we get to that power chord, the E power chord. And what I would tell my students again is to slow it down. So rather than playing it at the original speed, I would have them play it much slower. So something like this. That way they're able to really work on their fingering, making sure that their fingers are going to the proper frets and that the notes are coming out nice and clear as well. This will also help with the right hands and making sure that you're picking the right strings when you're supposed to, and that they're rhythmically accurate. They don't sound off as far as the rhythm goes, because that's such a huge issue when it comes to guitarists, is the lack of rhythm, which for me, admittedly, when I was a younger player, that was something that was a weakness of mine. And it wasn't until I picked up the bass and started learning that my rhythm got a lot better. So again, when you're playing guitar, don't neglect the rhythm. That's just going to hurt you in the long run. So again, don't play too fast, slow it down. So that's one common mistake I do see with students. The other one is finger placements. So let's use some open chords for this one, right? So for this one, we will use, let's say, our E minor chord. So the E minor chord is a very common chord that I would say all guitarists should know. This is one of the first chords I do teach my students as far as the more common open chords that guitarists play, because it's a very accessible chord and you're only using 2 fingers for this. So usually the fingers that are suggested for this chord are the second and third fingers, the middle and the ring finger. Now the reason why that is, and we're going to talk about this when we go to the next mistake that I usually see with beginner players, is because it's going to help us when we go from one chord to the next. So let's say we play an E minor, then we go to an A minor. The A minor is pretty much going to be the same thing as far as the fingers we're using, the middle and the ring finger over here. we're just going to bring it down one string. So we're going from the 5th and 4th string in the E minor to the 4th and 3rd string in the A minor. But rather than playing just those two fingers, because that would be an A sus2 chord, we have to lay our first finger down on the 2nd string, 1st fret, and that gives us our A minor sound. So when we're going from the E minor to the A minor, if we use these two fingers, it's going to make it so much easier to go from one chord to the next. Because if we were using different fingers, let's say we're using our first finger, our pointer finger, and then our second finger, our middle finger for the E minor. Then we go to the A minor. Well, we're not going to be able to get to that 1st fret because our first finger is being used already if we move all these down. So then we'd have to switch our fingers so that our second finger, our middle finger, is on the 2nd fret 4th string, and then our 3rd finger, our ring finger, is on the 2nd fret 3rd string. So that makes for a much more difficult transition as far as going from one chord to the next, compared to if we just used the 2nd and 3rd finger from the very beginning in our E minor. So you want to make sure that you're using the right fingers when you're supposed to. This doesn't just apply to chords as well. This applies to, playing lead parts or riffs. And a lot of times what I do with as far as teaching my students to address this particular issue is I use the 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise, in which all 4 fingers are being used on 4 different frets. That is a really great way to get used to using different fingers and getting used to the idea of positions as well, because when you play this, you can shift up to the 2nd position, then up to the 3rd position, then up to the 4th position. And it gets your fingers used to moving in that way, so that when you play a riff such as Good Times, Bad Times, that is not too difficult because you're using different fingers. So when I'm playing that riff, I'm starting on our E power chord. I go down to the 5th position, so from the 7th to the 5th position. I play the D power chord, but instead of playing it harmonically like I did for the E, harmonically meaning all together, I'm going to be playing it melodically as an arpeggio, so all the notes separated. And then after that, I shift down one more to the 4th position. That way it makes it much easier. If I still have my first finger over here on that D note, the 5th fret on our A string, then I have to move that first finger. I have to move that first finger down to our F sharp on the D string, on our 4th string. So that's going to make it a lot more difficult to get it nice and smooth. I can get it nice and smooth, but that's not going to be easy. You use different fingers, so you use your 2nd finger on that 5th fret on the A string, the D note. Much easier than using that first finger and then using the first finger again. Alright? So it's really important that you use proper finger placement on the frets. It doesn't mean that there's always going to be one right way to do it. It's just that there are going to be fingers that you can use for certain riffs and chords that are going to be optimal in order to play it much easier as within the context of a song, whether it's a riff or chord changes. And that brings us to our 3rd point, which is avoiding chord changes. So when you're learning chords, you're not just going to learn the chords by themselves, so our E minor, our G, D, C, C minor, E minor. So we're not going to learn these chords just by themselves, isolated. We want to work on getting these chords and being able to change from one chord to the next nice and smooth. So this is why when you take lessons with me, I'll go through certain songs that use these chords so that it gives you a chord progression to play off of in order to help with facilitating those chord changes and you're able to play a song while doing that. So it gives you the motivation to do that. Because if you're just learning exercises and you're not learning songs to help you improve, I definitely find that to be a lot more difficult, especially as far as giving you the motivation to practice. Because, realistically, I remember when I was younger and I would just get exercises from my guitar teacher without any context as far as like how to apply them to my playing, what songs I can utilize them in, what songs they even come from. Sometimes I would just get licks and I wouldn't even know what songs they were used in or what guitarist played them. So when you get that, I can understand not having the motivation to practice or think that, well, what I'm learning right now is not that important, because it's very difficult to see the importance of something if you don't see how it's applicable. So that's super important, is being able to utilize these chord changes, and the best way is just to learn songs, right? Learn songs that use the chord changes so you get used to changing from one chord to the next, like our C to the G, D, back to C, and then G. Just being able to do things like that. Yeah, you can just write out a whole bunch of random chords and then change going from one to the next, but a way to really help with motivating you to practice is to learn a song. And learning a song is going to help you, depending on what the song is going to help you with transitioning from one chord to the next. Now, another thing that I find, which is often something that's holding back beginner students, is practicing without a plan. First off, when I'm practicing, I do have certain things that I want to touch upon when I'm practicing, and it changes with every practice session, because sometimes I'm practicing to prep for a gig. Other times I'm practicing just for fun, just because I want to learn something personally. Other times I'm practicing because I need to teach something, so I want to make sure I'm able to play that, whatever it is I'm teaching. So you want to make sure you're going in with a plan as far as what you're practicing. And you can divvy up the time that you're practicing any way you want. Usually what I recommend is starting off with some sort of exercise, whether that's like something like the 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise, maybe running through a couple of licks like the diminished... that terribly played diminished lick. You can go through a couple of licks that you're learning at the time as well. Anything just to get your fingers moving and just to basically warm them up for what you're preparing to do in your practice session. Another thing is just practicing certain maybe chords, some rhythm exercises, sight reading, ear training, learning songs by ear. Incorporating those into your practice sessions is really going to help you a lot. And one thing that I try to do a lot, especially nowadays, is I try to incorporate as much ear training as possible, just learning songs by ear. And I'll just pop on some random songs that I'm listening to at the moment, and I'll just listen to it one time through and then play through it the second time. Or if I'm pretty familiar with the song, I'll just try playing through it the first time I'm listening to it. That way it keeps me on my feet and it gets me prepped for any sort of situation where I have to think on my feet and I have to learn something by ear. Because you never know when that's going to happen, especially when you're playing in a professional setting. Sometimes you have to revise something, or you have to learn how to play something a little bit differently. So being able to pick up on that very quickly is super beneficial. And incorporating that into your practicing is going to help prep you for those moments, right? So that's what I would suggest. Have some sort of goal when you're practicing. We talked about using the metronome. When you're using the metronome, have a goal BPM in mind. So let's say you're learning a song, it's 120 BPM. You're not really able to play it there, but you're able to comfortably play it at 70 BPM. Well then, what you're going to do is you're going to have a goal for that practice session. So let's say 70 BPM is good. Maybe the first day that you're practicing that song, you have the goal of being able to play it nice and smooth with the correct rhythm and the correct notes at 90 BPM. Then the next day, 100 BPM. Then the next day, 110. Then the next day, 120. That way, it gives you accessible goals without jumping too far ahead and making it so that what you're playing is not actually clean, and it's going to sound sloppy if you're rushing it as well. You want to make sure that you're taking the time to learn it and really getting it in your fingers. And learning it at a slower tempo, just like what I mentioned earlier with students playing too fast, if you're learning it at a slower tempo, it's going to be much easier for you to build up on that muscle memory and play it consistently without really thinking too much about it, because a lot of times when you're playing, you want it to be second nature. You want to build it up to be second nature, right? So playing it nice and slow and really building up on that, whatever it is you're playing, at a slower tempo is going to help you play it nice and smooth at a faster tempo. And then the last thing I want to mention, and this is something I'm guilty of as well. I can't help it. I've always done this, but I'm definitely a lot more lenient with myself as I get older, is comparing yourself to more advanced players. So it's very easy when you're first starting out to listen to great guitarists that you would like to emulate and be a little bit overwhelmed as far as comparing your abilities to the abilities of the player that you're trying to emulate. That's going to be a recipe for disaster as far as what you're trying to achieve on the instrument, because at the end of the day, you're learning music to find your own voice on the instrument. You want to find your own voice on the guitar. You don't want to completely copy somebody else's playing style. It's nice to learn from their playing style and to be able to copy, what they do, and then incorporate some of what they use and play into your own playing, such as what I talked about with the augmented lick from the Wes Montgomery song 4 and 6. But ultimately, you're your own player, and you're going to be different as far as your approach to the instrument goes, as far as the material that you're playing, as far as just how you handle the instrument. It's going to sound a lot different from the players that you most likely look up to. So don't compare yourself too much to advanced players. Keep that in mind, especially when you're a beginner, that it's going to take time to really get to that point where you're playing the instrument comfortably. And even when you play it comfortably, you're probably not going to play it to the level of some of the players that you really look up to. I mean, that's just reality, unless you want to spend 8 hours a day practicing, which for some players, they are more than willing to do that. And if you're playing professionally, that's something that you're going to have to do, is practice for, that many hours a day, especially if you want to build up on the consistency and being able to play things correctly, right every single time without any mistakes. That's a skill, and it does take a lot of practice time that a lot of people are not willing to put in. Admittedly, myself included, which is why I don't consider myself a professional player as much as I consider myself a teacher, right? I do play professionally, but that's not my main gig. My main gig is teaching. So I'm more than comfortable with that, with being a teacher. And other people are more comfortable with being professional players, which is why they don't mind putting in the practice needed in order to achieve that. So I hope this lesson was beneficial for you guys as far as going over the common mistakes that I see in beginner players. If you would like to book a lesson with 4 and 6, you can fill out the booking form in the description box below. I will get back to you within 24 hours, and then we'll be able to schedule a lesson together. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. See you in the next video. Rock and roll.